In 1971, more than 6 out of every 10 Americans belonged to one group, the middle class: a stable job, a house you could actually afford, a car in the driveway, and enough left over to save for retirement. Today, that number has fallen to just 51%. That's not a small shift. That's tens of millions of families who used to have a guaranteed seat at the table and don't anymore. But here's the part almost nobody tells you. Some economists will show you data proving the middle class is shrinking because people are getting richer, not poorer. Other economists will show you the opposite, that families are one medical bill away from falling apart. Both sides have the receipts. So which one is true? By the end of this video, you'll understand the real mechanism driving this and why the feeling of falling behind is becoming just as powerful as actually falling behind. Quick disclaimer before we go further. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not financial advice. The statistics discussed come from public research organizations including Pew Research Center, the American Enterprise Institute, the Federal Reserve, Brookings Institution, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Always do your own research and consult a licensed financial professional before making decisions about your own money. Here's what we're covering in this video. We're going to look at whether the American middle class is really disappearing, or whether that's a myth. We'll break down the 5 biggest forces squeezing household budgets right now: wages, housing, debt, retirement, and location. Then we'll look at a surprising counter-argument from economists who say the middle class isn't shrinking because people are getting poorer, but because millions of families are actually getting richer. We'll explain why people feel poor even when the numbers say otherwise, and we'll end with what this actually means for your own financial decisions. Plus, one growing threat almost nobody is talking about yet. Let's get into it. Let's start with the definition, because this is where most arguments secretly go wrong. Pew Research defines a household as middle class if it earns between 2/3 and double the national median income, adjusted for household size and location. Using this method, 51% of Americans were middle class in 2023, down from 61% in 1971. For a typical family of 3, that range today works out to roughly $42,000 to $125,000 a year, though it shifts depending on where you live. Notice something subtle here. This definition is relative. The middle class isn't a fixed dollar amount, it's a moving target tied to the median income. As the median rises, the goalposts for middle class rise with it. Keep that in mind, because we're coming back to it. Now, 5 forces are squeezing families right now, no matter which side of the debate you're on. Force 1. Wage stagnation. Wages haven't kept pace with the cost of living. After the pandemic, inflation spiked to levels not seen in 40 years, and paychecks never fully caught up. Companies optimized for profit margins and shareholder returns, not for wage growth relative to the cost of living. Force 2. The housing trap. This is the big one. The home price-to-income ratio hit 5.6 in 2024, the highest level ever recorded since data collection began in the 1960s. Home prices have roughly doubled since 2012. For the typical middle-class household, housing now eats up more than 1/3 of the entire annual budget, close to $18,000 a year. It's worse for renters. Nearly 1/3 of middle-income renters spend more than 30% of their income just on rent. In Florida, that number climbs past 55%. Force 3. The debt spiral. When wages don't stretch far enough, credit cards fill the gap. High-interest debt doesn't just cost money, it compounds against you every month, quietly transferring wealth from families to lenders. Force 4. The retirement cliff. Americans now believe they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably, up $200,000 in just 1 year. Nearly half don't expect to reach that number, and almost as many believe they'll outlive their savings entirely. Force 5. Geography. Where you live now shapes your middle-class status almost as much as how much you earn. In San Jose, only 42% of residents are middle class. In Olympia, Washington, it's 66%. Same country, same income brackets on paper, completely different reality on the ground. So far, this sounds like a straightforward story of decline. But here's where it gets strange. A major 2026 analysis from economists at the American Enterprise Institute, using fixed, inflation-adjusted income levels instead of Pew's shifting ones, found something almost nobody expected. Yes, the core middle class shrank from 36% of families in 1979 down to 31% today. But it didn't shrink because people got poorer. It shrank because the upper middle class tripled, from just 10% of families in 1979 to 31% in 2024. For the first time in American history, more families now sit above the middle class threshold than below it. Even the lower income group, the one that's supposed to represent the losers in this story, saw its average income rise 55% since 1971. The reason it looks bigger on paper is that the middle class got 60% richer. So the entry line for middle class moved up faster than incomes at the bottom did. In other words, almost everyone got a raise. The room just got reorganized around them. So why does it feel like nobody believes that? Here's the data point that breaks the narrative wide open. Between 2019 and 2025, the share of Americans who said the national economy was good or excellent collapsed, dropping 24 percentage points. But when the same people were asked about their own personal finances, the share who said they were doing okay or living comfortably dropped by just 2 percentage points. A 24-point collapse in how people see the economy overall. A 2-point dip in how they see their own life. That gap tells us something the income statistics never could. Americans aren't necessarily struggling more. They believe everyone else is struggling more, even while their own numbers stay relatively stable. There are a few reasons for this. First, the price of staying middle class rose faster than the price of everything else. Income nationally rose about 23% over the period researchers studied. Major expenses that define a middle-class lifestyle, housing, healthcare, and childcare, rose anywhere from 83% to over 300% in the same window. You can earn more and still fall behind because the finish line sprinted ahead of you. Second, a six-figure income means something completely different depending on your zip code. A $120,000 household income in San Francisco is barely lower middle class. The same income in Mississippi makes you comfortably upper middle class. Third, and this is the quiet flaw in the optimistic argument, those numbers measure income. They don't fully account for debt or wealth, and 1 in 3 middle-class families across 160 metro areas studied by Brookings still struggle to afford basic necessities. Now, here's a piece of this puzzle that most videos on this topic completely skip. Even within the middle class, the gains have not been distributed evenly. Research from Brookings shows a significant gap in middle-class household income by race, with white and Asian households outpacing Black, Latino, and Native American households by a wide margin. And there's a second, newer threat building underneath all of this that barely existed in past decades of this debate: automation and artificial intelligence. A growing share of the mid-level, white-collar jobs that used to define middle-class stability, roles in administration, customer service, entry-level analysis, and basic coding are now the exact jobs most exposed to AI-driven automation. Historically, technological disruption hit blue-collar and manufacturing jobs first. This time, economists are warning the middle rungs of the office ladder may be hit just as hard, if not harder. That's a variable the 20th century middle class never had to face, and it's one worth watching closely over the next decade. So, if the middle class isn't disappearing in the dramatic sense the headlines suggest, what's actually happening is arguably more dangerous because it's harder to see coming. It's not extinction, it's fragility. More families are earning more money than ever, but with thinner margins. Housing eats a third of the budget instead of a quarter. Retirement targets are climbing faster than actual savings. Debt sits closer to the surface, ready to spiral the moment a paycheck is missed or a medical bill arrives. This is a middle class that looks fine on a spreadsheet and feels one emergency away from crisis in real life. Economists call this negative financial slack, no cushion, no room for a bad month. And this is where both sides of the debate actually agree, even if they don't say it out loud. Whatever you call this group today, it's more exposed to shocks than it used to be. So, what do you actually do with this? Stop comparing your life to a national average. Because your city, household size, and local cost of living matter more than any national headline. Treat housing as the single biggest lever you control, since it's the largest slice of the squeeze for nearly every income bracket. Build slack, not just savings, because the danger isn't lacking money, it's lacking a buffer for when something goes wrong. Watch debt like it's a wildfire, not a tool, because in an economy where prices have outrun wages for years, debt is the fastest way an ordinary bad month becomes a multi-year setback. And remember the gap between the economy and your economy. The data shows most people rate their own finances far better than they rate the national picture. Don't let headlines convince you your situation is worse than it actually is. But don't let comfort convince you that you're immune to the fragility either. So, is the middle class about to get wiped out? Not in the way the panic suggests. It isn't vanishing. In many ways, it's being promoted into something bigger and wealthier than it's ever been. But it's also standing on ground that shifts more than it used to, where the cost of staying secure rises faster than the reward for working hard, where one bad year can undo a decade of progress, and where a new wave of automation is quietly aiming at the exact jobs that built this class in the first place. The middle class isn't disappearing. It's learning to live without a safety net and hoping for now that it doesn't need one.